Welcome to Open Networking TV. This is the catch up. And today we've got on the show for you J.R. Rivers of Cumulus Networks. They're the makers of Linux for networking. You really brought, Linux into the networking or networking into the Linux age is probably a better way to put it. From a market dynamic standpoint, from a Wall Street standpoint, Cumulus has really been one of the startups to watch and seen as this really huge disruptive vehicle, and you've been sitting very visibly at the helm of that.
Yeah, thanks, Art. Thanks for everybody for taking a look at this video. We're from the Cumulus perspective. Our story begins in a kind of pretty simple perspective in that I've been in networking for 16 years, worked for Cisco, helped Google as they started building their networking equipment. And inevitably, when I started off in networking, in every big new transition, there's always been one fundamental goal, which is to help customers get better interconnect than they had before. And when I talk to customers in general, they talk about the super fancy things they might need with networking, and then I always try to break it down for them and say, what do you really want? And in the end, it always turns into, I want a big fat free bus. So I want a really high capacity network. I want it to not get in my way. I think James Hamilton said it great in some of his Amazon pitches. In recent times, networking has been in the way of customers, and just a lot of times people want to take James's statements to mean, hey, I need to have some new fancy network feature that the network didn't do yesterday. And really, what James was trying to say is that from a cost performance standpoint, networking as of a couple of years ago was nowhere near the evolution phase that compute or even storage were at. And so from a Cumulus perspective, we're really focused on just kind of moving the networking industry into that same evolved barrier. Super high capacity interconnect, easy to deploy at scale, works pretty easy, easy to acquire. It's kind of affordable capacity that's easy to get out there. And that's what drives us in pretty much everything that we do.
If you take a step back and talk about the changes that we're taking that we're trying to make in the networking industry, and you look at the kind of economic or macroeconomic standpoint, we're saying that any industry, this is nothing that is surprising about the networking industry or unique to the networking industry. Any industry that has lopsided market shares and without multiple really strong and competitive suppliers, they all do bad. They all suffer in innovation. They all end up passing along a lot of extra costs to the customer system. And I think having open source as the center of your ecosystem is really a critical component into building those commons that you need.
Yeah, I think you've raised a really good point. Cumulus Linux is from a networking perspective, and a lot of what we do is it leverages and focuses and integrates open source. And a lot of networking technology that customers consume today, it does have a bunch of open source components. We were just going through a master source agreement with a customer recently, and they have us give the open source list, and they were worried about a bunch of libraries that we might have that have certain licenses. And we took a look at a bunch of competitive products, and we recognized that all of those competitive products had the same license exposure for the customer that they were worried about with our platform, but we were transparent about it. The customer could see everything under the covers. And it's that transparency, I think, that the open source community or that open source perspective gives to customers. It's not so much that a customer wants to go build something themselves. It's the fact that they can see inside if they choose to. If they want to look at a piece of code and understand how something works, they're allowed to. But more often than not, they want somebody to take responsibility for making sure that everything works all the time. Because as a customer, you don't want to go hire a bunch of developers to integrate stuff, any of this code, whether it's networking or storage or even compute code. You want somebody else to be responsible for that integration at scale. You just want to use it to further your business cause.
No, today, you're seeing, like the Peter Diamandis and the Clinton Global Foundation out there showing that, hey, as we bring the rest of these 7 billion people onto the internet, it's not about, hey, my product's better than that product. It's about, wow, we're going to change everything we know about health. We're going to take all the people who are, starving and without water in the world and change that. And I think, we can come together in these open movements and put that behind us. It's fundamentally important. And I think, in realizing that we're all here doing really important work for the future of the world.
Yeah, and I agree with you in the fact that what we're doing is quintessential and meaningful. We're doing it in our small little piece of the industry and the industrial complex that gets technology applied usefully to the common good. When I look at one of our funding rounds, we were Andreessen Horowitz happens to have led our Series A funding, and when we were talking to the partners, we started explaining what our vision was and why this mattered to us. Why are we interested in this whole networking thing? And Mark Andreessen latched onto both Nolan and I's core kind of visceral perspectives very early in the presentation. He stood up and looked at the rest of the partners and said, look, guys, it's clear that the Cumulus team isn't focused on reducing the cost of what somebody bought yesterday. The Cumulus team is focused on giving people way more networking that they had yesterday, so they can write applications that they couldn't write yesterday and do things that we don't even know about. And that's really, in the end, what drives us.
And then if you look at Fitbits to everything else that's going to be connected to a network, in there is pretty much, everything, somewhere in that realm of things connected to the network is every new product that anyone's going to launch, pretty much. And a lot of those are going to be products that those people who are launching them want to differentiate on, right? And in some cases, you may be able to say, I can take a standard TCP/IP stack and, we'll differentiate somewhere else in the application layer. But in a lot of these cases, you're not. To be able to find your differentiation, you're going to need to go and customize various components of the stack. And regardless of whose off-the-shelf operating system you're using, if you're using an off-the-shelf operating system and you're waiting for a feature to be baked in, one thing is for certain: once a feature is available in a off-the-shelf operating system, it will not be a differentiated piece of your product offering. So right. I think as people look forward, and especially as more and more companies get into the Internet of Things and into making more and more of their own products network centric, to me it seems Cumulus is really important in terms of, if I want to be able to innovate there, I need to have that flexibility.
Right. I mean, Internet of Things is a really interesting place to start, because you can take that broad picture, that broad perspective, and start to narrow it down. When I look at Internet of Things, from a commercial perspective, I look out and I see companies like Cisco and others stand up and try and be the leaders of Internet of Things. From my perspective, kind of crock of poo, because Internet of Things by definition is a federation. I have a loosely coupled ecosystem. I have bits and pieces that can connect to each other in ways that are reasonably well understood, and they interoperate and interact with other pieces of the Internet of Things ecosystem as ships in the night. They don't even know they exist. My classic example I give to people all the time: when you turn your cell phone on, you connect to at least 10 services through the network, whether it's the data network from your smartphone provider or through your Wi-Fi. It's all happening. You don't know who's transporting any of this data anywhere, but you connect to those services and you get the behavior that you're expecting out of it. And it's that federation is what makes it work. And the definition of federation means that nobody owns it. You don't get to decide Internet of Things is X because I am company Y and I'm big and I have a $40 million or $40 billion annual revenue stream. It's going to happen without you. You don't influence this. All you can help enable it. And from a Cumulus perspective, our goal in enabling it is high capacity interconnect in data centers, in carriers, and just focus on that. How do you move bits around really fast and really easily at low OpEx, low CapEx?
But it is fascinating, right? When you think about and you do see all these guys out there saying, hey, we have the platform for the Internet of Things, and we're going to be and I think, whenever I hear that, I think, wow, you really don't understand how big and how diverse the Internet of Things is going to be to you, right?
Well, it already is. Internet of Things is just a kind of the continuation of where we're at today, right? The refrigerators and TVs and the Nest, your heating controllers, your light systems, all these things are already on the internet. This isn't a new thing, a new initiative. This is not a set of standards that exist around it. It's about a very loosely coupled ecosystem. From boiling it down to the world that we live in, the small piece, that Cumulus world is, we chose Linux as the foundation for the networking operating system because it allows federation in this small part of the world. We have customers that put together well-known configuration management tools or some homegrown things, monitoring mechanisms. They use a set of tools that make sense for them in their environment, and it's very federated. All these pieces can work together, or in exclusion of each other, depending on what a customer might want. And we just provide that platform, or that foundation that an operating system is supposed to provide, that allows customers to make those choices. And that's why we've been reasonably successful along the way. We're seeing enterprises. I'll kind of back up a second. When we started the company, we recognized that we would be very applicable to internet-facing businesses, whether it's a web services company, a service provider, big internet retail presences, anything else like that. We knew we would make sense to them. We were unclear as to how this was going to work out in the context of enterprises. And what we've noticed over the second half of last year is we're seeing enterprises look at their internal IT and they say, look, we have this legacy IT it's not built on a federated model. It doesn't look like Internet of Things in a weird way. It looks like I have this application. I need this crazy brittle networking technology to make my application run. And it costs me a lot of money in people time, OpEx for, in dollars going to vendors, and in CapEx in terms of dollars going to vendors to run these applications in these networks this way. And when they look out at the rest of the world, they see people like Zanga that are able to run a very distributed, federated business. They have some data centers where they run an application half inside, half outside in public cloud. They move applications around. It's a very loosely coupled, highly federated business that's run. And these enterprises are looking at it saying, I need to have that same flexibility on my side. And yes, I can look at something like VCE and get a VBlock and plug it in. But when I look at the metrics around that, it doesn't align with what I expect from my business metrics. When I look at my IT department, I want to measure those people as though someone like Amazon or Google were measuring themselves. When Amazon sits down and looks at CapEx and availability and OpEx and headcount and all of those things, they come out with a kind of certain capacity per capita. Right? It's like, how many network switches do I have per networking engineer? How many servers do I have per sysadmin? Actually, when you look at some of the really big guys, they don't even break it down that way. They say, how many switches and servers do I have per cloud admin? Mm-hmm. Right? And they're starting to get their heads wrapped around a cloud admin or a cloud admin team that may have people that know a little bit more about networking, a little bit more about storage, but they're still on the same team with expected that same administrative breadth. And the enterprises are seeing that unfold, and they're saying, I need to have that same perspective around my IT. And I'm not going to get there by tweaking my current IT department. I'm going to get there by starting a new IT department that's focused in that same way.
I think, it's been interesting to watch, over the past, I guess, decade now as cloud computing has kind of marched through, because at first it was like, wow, that was cool. And then it was like, we need this. And then it was like, okay, IT directors and CIOs are going to start to get fired if we don't have something similar. And I think now I think businesses have gotten much more to the realization that if we're not able to operate our compute in a manner that's somewhere near the efficiency levels of some of these leading deployments, then we might as well pack it up and go home. Compute is it's always been important, but the extent to which it's becoming even that much more important is really, profound. So I think it's becoming, one of these things. You've got to do it. You have to hit those efficiency targets.
Yeah, and I think when you sit down and seriously study the industry, what you recognize is that there are many existing businesses that do a great job of leveraging hybrid private and public cloud. I used Zanga as an earlier example, and I'll continue to use them because they've been pretty public about how they do this. When they decide that an application is matured, they can run their own private data center much more cost effectively at a much higher pace than they can by using public cloud. They grow new games in the public cloud because the expansion, the capacity, and the ability to expand is very high. But once the game becomes mature, they've been moving it back into private cloud. And you're seeing roughly the same thing starting to occur in the enterprises, where some cases they use public cloud, some cases they use private cloud. They want the flexibility to do both. And they want to be able to look at public cloud as an expansion, not as a cost reduction, but as an expansion. If you're going to have private cloud, it has to measure up to public cloud.
That's it.
You use public cloud for a set of characteristics: expansion, maybe reliability, global reach. There's a whole series of reasons why public cloud might make sense to you, but you don't want it to be because it's the most cost-effective way to do compute.
Yeah, if you had to pick, one thing in the Cumulus community or in the roadmap or what have you, what do you think are one or two most exciting things for the Cumulus community?
Oh, yeah, that's hard because we
Right?
have a lot of them. There's a networking feature that a lot of customers use, especially enterprise customers. It's multi-chassis link aggregation. Some people call it MLAG. People call it virtual port channel, that sort of thing. It's the ability to dual home a server in a layer 2 type domain, and we've been working on that over the last 4 or 5 months. It's being released. We have a bunch of customers that are using it right now. It's being used at scale in a couple interesting places. So from us, that's kind of rolling out. It gives us a slightly bigger addressable market, makes it easier for some customers to consume. What was super exciting about that is, I was involved both directly and peripherally at that feature being rolled out in the context of Cisco a couple times, and it was usually large teams of engineers that took a huge amount of time. And we just got finished doing a postmortem of our rollout of the feature, and it was about 50 man months, right? And that's 50 man months.
Wow.
Yeah, and from start to finish, that's from when
That's
we
crazy.
decided we were going to
Yeah,
start.
I mean, and it shows the type of agility that you can achieve with some of these platforms, right?
Yeah, well, it's part of it's the platforms, part of it's the maturity of the underlying silicon, and part of it's the fact that we're working with the Linux networking stack, which is a pretty rich networking stack. So you're able to make minor modifications and move the whole industry forward in that context. So it's super powerful, great for customers, and it's pragmatic for us to develop and deploy on time. We're working with a couple service providers around MPLS and carrier networking technologies. I'd say that's super early stage for us, so that'll be kind of rolling out late this year in terms of general availability. But it's super exciting to see what we're able to do in the context of industry standard silicon and large carriers and service providers around MPLS. And then the last piece is kind of near and dear to us collectively is we have a lot of people here that are very fixated and focused on automation. And one of the observations that we've collectively made, not just ourselves, but people in the industry, is that there's not a great kind of REST API around Linux. And so what we're starting to do is put together some programs where we facilitate a REST API. It's not the Cumulus Linux API. That doesn't make any sense. That's not our DNA, but it's more of an API framework for Linux. So you can
awesome.
You can use pretty much any Linux package can plug into it. You get a REST termination, and it's good. We have a great vision. We'll see where it gets. We're starting to engage not only our resources, but a couple of our customers and other friendly organizations around the globe in contributing into this. And it's going to be really powerful to see that roll out over the first half of next year.
Can I ask if we were to take another swing at that question, but a little bit bigger picture? Let's talk about the industry as a whole, whether it's open computing or open networking or wherever you want to go with it. What are some of the big trends that are catching your interest and exciting you this year?
The acceleration is what's catching my interest, and it's got me really excited right now. When you look at what's going on, when we started Cumulus, and when others, not just us, we're not rocket scientists. There's a lot of really smart people in the world. When we started Cumulus Networks and we talked about what we were doing, we ran into people all the time and said, "This is a great idea. I love it. Why didn't this happen 10 years ago?" And while that feels good that someone agrees with you, this is just someone that's talking, right? They're not buying. They're not making a commitment. They're just talking. What we've seen over the last 6 months, and we're continuing to see even as this year starts, is more and more customers are coming along and saying, not just, "I think this is a good idea," but I want this idea. This is my thing. And when we look at these customers, they're not, again, just looking at it from a networking perspective, as you pointed out. They're looking at it from a full data center perspective. I want an open ecosystem around my data center. I want cloud admins. I want to leverage all of these technologies to build an infrastructure that allows me to build great business applications. And so that's what really excites me. It's the people are coming not just to drive costs down and say, hey, give me the thing I bought yesterday to lower costs. They're saying, I need to build an infrastructure that allows me to build better business applications.
Like if you look at VMware, if you look at Microsoft, where they're sit with private cloud, it's like the whole industry has been hyping people up about this for like 3-4+ years now, and are just finally getting to the point in 2015 where we're giving people that trigger to pull. So I think in the Cumulus perspective, a lot of that is more open-mindedness towards Linux, more interest in DevOps as a whole. And I think, as we nail into the networking side, we're seeing, more of that Linux interest carrying over, and I want to run my network that way. But it's definitely interesting, interesting, going to be an interesting year, seeing so much hit the fan.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's really it's the kind of coincidental collision, we'll call it, of technology, maturity, and perspective, meaning perspective on the customer side, right? Like, I keep harping on this cloud admin perspective, but I can't tell you how easy it is of a filter when I talk to a customer. When they talk in the context of having a cloud admin, I recognize what they mean and what they want out of their system. And if they don't understand what I mean when I say cloud admin, then there's a pretty big disconnect. Yeah. And we're seeing more and more companies. We obviously, like you said, we've been around for a while. We've talked to enterprises for 2 years or so. And what we're seeing is people that we talked to a couple of years ago that didn't understand what a cloud admin was, they're all of a sudden coming back. And one of the things they're actually saying is, hey, JR, I finally understand what you meant. I get it. We're ready to go.
Yeah, and that's what's exciting. I think the next wave of craziness is very, very close to us. I'm talking to David Meyer in a little while, and he always brings this up. But this is the fact that inside of these Google scale data centers, we have billions of transactions happening a second. And so as much as there was a lot of fear of the cloud efficiencies, I think now that we're the autonomic agents and the growth of autonomic agents is probably going to be a whole new inflection point, really, for the coming years. But
I think part of it's that, but part of it's maybe slightly simpler on a technology perspective. When I grew up as an engineer, I used to write a lot of assembly language programs, and you'd be pretty hard pressed to find people that write in assembly language anymore, because you can generate a much more efficient time spent on a Java app or Python or some super high level language, Ruby, whatever you want, Ruby on Rails, and you go up and up the stack. But you can be way more efficient by using this high level language and leveraging kind of overcapacity of the infrastructure, i.e. the server itself, to get a lot of functionality with a lot less time put into it. And when you look at when people started thinking about cloud computing, it was a time realistically when networks were low capacity, servers were low capacity, storage was slow and fragile. And what's happened is the technology has matured. The servers are blazing fast right now. Storage is quick and low latency. Networks are becoming higher and higher capacity, which allows you to all these fears that people had around what does it mean to be cloud? Why do I have to build some super brittle infrastructure? Those all disappear, and you kind of end up with that computer. For those of you that are Star Trek fans, remember the computer that was everywhere and you could ask it anything? Well, that's where we're headed, right? It's a super high capacity computer that's everywhere and can do anything for anybody.
I'm really glad that we've grateful to have you on. You're like I said, a big idol of the Linux community, and really the guy when it comes to Linux and networking, right? And Cumulus has done just such tremendous progress in helping to facilitate a more open ecosystem and driving good things.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk to you.